She had not slept in 3 days. Every morning, the walk to school felt like walking through a nightmare. The whispered threats from older boys. The black sedan that followed her home. The fear was suffocating 7-year-old Ruby Dawson, and no one was coming to help. Desperate, when every adult had failed her, she did something truly unimaginable. She walked up to the pale figure everyone feared to even whisper about, and asked him for protection. What happened next didn't just stop the threats. It exposed the predators the entire town had been ignoring. And when Aldrich Stormvale, flanked by his security detail and a convoy of matching SUVs, walked Ruby Dawson onto those school grounds, the bullies realized they weren't dealing with a helpless little girl anymore. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Let me know, because this story about courage, community, and protection is universal. It crosses borders. And I want to see how far Ruby's message reaches today. Now, let's continue. Ruby Dawson used to love the walk to school. She'd count the cracks in the sidewalk, collect smooth pebbles for her pocket, and wave at Mrs. Chin watering her roses on Maple Street. That was before Henry and Andrew decided she was easy prey. It started small. A shove in the cafeteria line. Laughter when her lunch tray clattered to the floor, applesauce splattered across her sneakers. Ruby's mother, Charlotte, told her to ignore them, that bullies fed on attention. So Ruby tried. She kept her head down, walked faster, ate lunch in the library. But Henry and Andrew were 12, nearly twice her size, and they were bored. The shoves became trips. The laughter became threats whispered in passing. "We know where you live, baby Ruby." They'd wait for her after school, blocking the sidewalk, forcing her to walk through the alley behind the hardware store. The alley smelled like rust and rotting wood, and Ruby's heart would hammer so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Charlotte noticed the change. Her bright, chattering daughter became silent. Ruby picked at dinner, flinched at sudden sounds, and started having accidents at night, something she hadn't done since she was 4. Charlotte held her, stroked her blonde hair, and promised she'd talk to the school.
She did.
The principal listened with polite concern and promised to keep an eye on things. Nothing changed. Then came the black sedan. Ruby first noticed it on a Tuesday. An older car, windows tinted dark, idling across from the school pickup zone. She wouldn't have thought anything of it, except it was there again on Wednesday and Thursday. And by Friday, she realized it followed her. The man inside never got out, but she could see his silhouette. Watching. Waiting. When Charlotte picked her up late one afternoon, Ruby saw him clearly for the first time through the windshield, a pale, thin man in his 20s with hollow eyes that didn't blink. He smiled at her. A slow, deliberate smile that made her stomach twist. Mama, that man. What man, sweetie? By the time Charlotte turned, the black sedan was pulling away. Ruby started seeing him everywhere. In the grocery store parking lot. Parked outside their apartment at dusk. Once, she woke at 2 a.m. and swore she saw his face at her bedroom window, though they lived on the second floor. She stopped sleeping. The exhaustion carved shadows under her eyes, made her hands tremble. In class, she'd stare at the door, waiting for it to open. For him to walk in. For Henry and Andrew to corner her again. Charlotte noticed her daughter disappearing into fear, piece by piece, and felt utterly powerless to stop it. Charlotte Dawson took a personal day from work and arrived at Maplewood Elementary at 8 a.m. sharp, before the principal could hide behind meetings and phone calls. She'd rehearsed what she'd say, kept her voice calm and professional, presented the facts like evidence in a trial. "My daughter is being physically intimidated by 2 older students, Henry Morrison and Andrew Kelsch. They've threatened her. They follow her. She's terrified." Principal Vickers leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, expression practiced and sympathetic. Mrs. Dawson, I understand your concern. Children can be spirited. But Henry and Andrew are good kids. High grades, both on the baseball team. Sometimes personality conflicts happen. This isn't a personality conflict. They're 12. She's 7. I'll have a word with them, of course. But without concrete evidence of physical harm, my hands are somewhat tied. We can't discipline students based on he said, she said situations. You understand. Charlotte understood perfectly. Ruby was small, quiet, and didn't matter enough. She tried again, anyway. There's also a man. An adult man in a black sedan who's been following her. Watching her. I've seen him 3 times now outside our apartment. Vickers' expression shifted to something bordering on concern, but only bordering. Have you contacted the police? I'm going there next. Good. That's really more their jurisdiction. But I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. Parents can be a bit hypervigilant sometimes. Understandably so. Charlotte left before she said something that would make things worse for Ruby. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork. The officer who took her statement, Officer Brennan, according to his nameplate, was younger than she expected and far less interested. So this individual, this Brandon Ellis, you said? He hasn't approached your daughter? Hasn't spoken to her? No physical contact. No, but he's following her. He's always there. Ma'am, I understand this is frightening, but legally, we can't act on suspicion. Being parked on a public street isn't a crime. Without evidence of intent to harm, without any direct threat or contact, there's nothing we can charge him with. So, I'm supposed to wait until he does something? Officer Brennan's expression softened slightly, which was somehow worse than indifference. Pity was useless. Keep documenting. Take photos if you see him again. Get his license plate. Build a case. But right now, my hands are tied.
Tied.
Everyone's hands were tied. Everyone except the man in the black sedan. Charlotte drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. She held it together through dinner, boxed macaroni and cheese that Ruby barely touched. Held it together through bath time and the bedtime story Ruby was too exhausted to hear. But when she closed Ruby's bedroom door and collapsed on the living room couch, the dam broke. I don't know what to do, she whispered into her hands, tears hot and useless. I don't know who to turn to. He's still out there. They're still hurting her. And nobody cares. Nobody will help. She didn't know Ruby was awake. Didn't know her daughter was pressed against the bedroom door, small hands flat against the wood, listening to her mother's defeated sobs. Ruby slid down to the floor, pulled her knees to her chest, and felt the last fragile thread of hope snap. The grown-ups couldn't save her. The teachers wouldn't. The police wouldn't. If she wanted to be safe, she'd have to find someone, something so frightening that even the monsters were afraid. And Ruby knew exactly where to find him. Ruby had heard the name whispered at the grocery store, murmured between her mother's friends over coffee, spoken in hushed tones by the crossing guard who always looked twice at the black cars that sometimes passed through town. Aldrich Stormvale. The man who'd bought the old Whitmore estate 6 months ago and transformed it into something that didn't belong in their small town. The mansion sat on the hill like a sleeping predator, all black iron gates and stone walls, pristine and cold. People said he never came out during the day, that his staff wore suits like Secret Service agents, that he was impossibly rich, impossibly pale, impossibly wrong. Not natural, Mrs. Chun had said, shaking her head. A man who looks like that, who moves like that. My grandson saw him once at the town hall meeting. Said his eyes were like winter. Charlotte had shushed her. Don't fill Ruby's head with ghost stories. But Ruby remembered. She remembered everything now, lying awake at 3 a.m., her mind cycling through every scrap of overheard conversation, every hushed warning, every fearful glance toward the hill. They said Aldrich Stormvale was someone you didn't approach, someone you didn't bother, someone dangerous.
Perfect.
She waited until Sunday morning, when her mother was in the shower, slipped out of the apartment in her red hoodie and sneakers, the ones with the fraying laces. She didn't leave a note.
Didn't know what she'd say.
Didn't know if she'd come back. The walk to the Stormvale estate took 20 minutes. Ruby's legs burned. Her chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped rubber bands around her ribs. Twice, she almost turned back. But then she'd see the black sedan in her mind, see Henry's cruel smile, hear her mother crying, and she'd keep walking. The gates were taller than she'd imagined. 12 feet of ornate black iron topped with spear points that gleamed in the morning sun. There was a call box, a camera, a warning sign about private property. Ruby didn't press the button. She was 7, small for her age, and the gap between the gate and the stone pillar was just wide enough. She squeezed through. The driveway was smooth black asphalt, lined with perfectly trimmed hedges. 2 massive SUVs sat parked near the entrance, black, windows tinted so dark they looked solid. Ruby's sneakers made small scuffing sounds that seemed too loud in the silence. She made it halfway to the house before she heard footsteps behind her. "Stop right there." Ruby froze. Turned slowly. 3 men in black suits stood in a semicircle, their faces hidden behind sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Fedoras shadowed their expressions. They didn't move, didn't reach for her, but their presence was a wall of absolute authority. "This is private property," one said. His voice was flat, professional. "You need to leave." Ruby opened her mouth, but no sound came. The fear she'd been holding back for weeks crashed over her all at once. Henry's shoves, Andrew's threats, the black sedan, her mother's sobs, the police officer's indifference, and suddenly she was crying. Not quiet tears, but shaking, gasping sobs that bent her double. "Please," she choked out. "Please, I need help. Nobody will help me. Please." Step back from the child. The voice came from behind the security detail, low and calm and cold enough to frost glass. The men in suits moved aside immediately, parting like a curtain. And there he was. Aldrich Stormvale was taller than any man Ruby had ever seen, impossibly pale with hair like platinum silk falling past his shoulders. He wore a black velvet jacket with gold embroidery that caught the light like trapped fire. His face was beautiful in a way that made her think of marble statues, perfect and sharp and not quite human. He looked at her with eyes that had seen centuries, and Ruby forgot how to breathe. Then Aldrich Stormvale did something she didn't expect. He knelt. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to her eye level, close enough that she could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the absence of warmth in his skin. He reached out and placed one pale hand on her shoulder. His touch was gentle. His expression was utterly serious. "Tell me," he said quietly, "who has made you cry?" Ruby tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat, caught behind sobs that made her whole body shake. She wiped her face with her sleeve, but the tears kept coming, hot and unstoppable. Aldrich waited. His hand remained steady on her shoulder, neither pulling her closer nor pushing her away. He simply knelt there in his expensive velvet jacket on the cold asphalt, patient as stone, while his security detail stood at respectful distance. There's boys," Ruby finally managed, voice hitching. "Henry and Andrew. They're big and they push me and they say they know where I live and they're gonna—" Another sob cut her off. "Breathe," Aldrich said softly. Not unkind, but commanding. Ruby sucked in air, shuddering. "They wait for me after school. Make me go through the alley. And Mama talked to the principal, but he said it was just kids being kids." Her hands twisted in the fabric of her hoodie. "But it's not. They hurt me." Aldrich's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him, a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. "And there's a man," Ruby whispered, and this is where her voice truly broke. "A man in a black car. He follows me. He's always there. Outside school. Outside our apartment. I saw his face in my window, and Mama says I was dreaming, but I wasn't. Her legs gave out. She would have crumpled to the ground if Aldrich hadn't caught her, his movements faster than human reflex. He held her steady, let her cry into his shoulder, while his velvet jacket absorbed her tears. "The police?" he asked quietly.
"Can't do anything."
"That's what they said. They can't do anything until he does something." Ruby pulled back, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "But I don't want to wait until he does something. I'm so scared. I can't sleep. I can't eat. And nobody will help me. Nobody believes me." She saw it then, something flickering behind those winter-pale eyes. Recognition. Understanding. And beneath it, something that might have been rage, ancient and absolute and perfectly controlled. Aldrich had walked this earth for nearly 4 centuries. He'd seen empires rise and crumble, watched humanity repeat its cycles of cruelty with exhausting predictability. He'd grown weary of mortal concerns, distanced himself from their petty dramas and systemic failures. He'd forgotten, somewhere in the long decades, what it meant to feel protective of something genuinely innocent. But this child, this terrified, courageous child who'd walked through her fear to ask a monster for help because the humans had failed her, reminded him of what he'd once believed. That power without purpose was just another form of death. He took her small hand in his. His skin was cool, unnaturally smooth, but his grip was gentle. "Ruby," he said, and she startled slightly that he knew her name. He'd heard it, of course, in her broken confession. "Look at me."
She did.
Met those impossible eyes and didn't look away. "I am going to make you a promise," Aldrich said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an oath sworn in blood and witnessed by centuries. "No one who harms an innocent child under my protection remains untouched. The boys who threaten you, the man who stalks you, they will learn what it means to be prey." Ruby's tears had stopped. She stared at him, something like hope kindling in her chest for the first time in weeks. "Tomorrow morning," Aldrich continued, "I will walk you to school. You will not walk alone again. Do you understand?" Ruby nodded, unable to speak. "Tell your mother I will come at 7:30. Tell her the king keeps his promises." He stood, still holding her hand, and gestured to one of his security detail. "Marcus will drive you home." "You'll really come?" Ruby's voice was so small. Aldrich looked down at her, and for just a moment, something almost human flickered across his perfect features. "I swear it on my name and the darkness that bore me. You are under my protection now, and I have never broken a vow." Charlotte came out of the shower to an empty apartment and a silence that screamed wrong. Ruby, no answer. No sound of the television. No scrape of crayons against paper. She checked the bedroom, the closet, under the bed, where Ruby sometimes hid. Nothing. The front door was unlocked. Ruby's jacket was gone. Panic arrived like ice water in her veins. Charlotte ran barefoot into the hallway, hair dripping, pounding on the neighbor's door. Mrs. Patterson hadn't seen her. Neither had the couple downstairs. Charlotte sprinted back inside, grabbed her phone with shaking hands, and was halfway through dialing 911 when she saw it. Ruby's small notebook on the kitchen table, open to a page with a crayon drawing. A big house on a hill, a stick figure in a red jacket, and words in Ruby's careful, crooked handwriting. Getting help from the king.
No, 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 no.
Charlotte knew exactly where her daughter had gone. The realization was a fist around her heart. She threw on shoes, didn't bother with a coat, and ran for her car. The drive to the Stormvale estate took 12 minutes. It felt like hours. Charlotte's mind spun through every worst-case scenario. Ruby hurt, Ruby lost, Ruby taken by something worse than the man in the black sedan. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had. The pale man who didn't age, who never appeared in daylight, whose presence in their town had come with rumors too dark to speak aloud. And her 7-year-old daughter had walked straight into his domain. The black gates loomed ahead. Charlotte slammed on the brakes, threw the car into park, and ran toward the call box, ready to scream into it until someone let her in. The gates swung open before she reached them. A black SUV sat in the driveway, back door open. And standing beside it, small and impossibly calm, was Ruby. "Baby." Charlotte ran, scooped her daughter into her arms, checked her for injuries with frantic hands. "Are you hurt? Did anyone? What were you thinking? You can't just—" "Mrs. Dawson." The voice stopped her cold. Aldrich Stormvale stood 3 paces away, flanked by 2 men in black suits. Up close, he was even more unsettling than the rumors suggested. Too tall, too pale, too perfectly still. His eyes were the color of winter fog, and they looked at her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and insignificant. Charlotte pulled Ruby behind her instinctively. "Your daughter came to me for help," Aldrich said, his voice quiet and precise. "She told me about the boys who hurt her, about the man who stalks her, about the authorities who have failed to protect her. I don't know what she told you, but she told me the truth." Aldrich's gaze didn't waver. "And I have given her my word that she will be safe." Charlotte's hands tightened on Ruby's shoulders. "Listen, I appreciate whatever this is, but we'll handle it ourselves. We don't need—" "You've already tried." There was no judgment in his tone, only fact. "The school dismissed you. The police have no legal grounds to act. Your daughter hasn't slept in 3 days because she's terrified a predator will break into your second-floor apartment while you're asleep. Tell me, Mrs. Dawson, what is your plan now?" The words hit like physical blows because they were true. All of them. Charlotte felt tears burning behind her eyes. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing." Aldrich stepped closer, and Charlotte forced herself not to retreat. "Tomorrow morning, I will escort Ruby to school. Myself and my security detail. I will make it abundantly clear to everyone, the bullies, the staff, the man in the black sedan, that she is under my protection. That any harm to her will be answered. You can't just— people will talk. They'll think. Let them think what they wish." Aldrich's expression was carved from ice. "Do you want her daughter to be safe? Or do you want to maintain appearances?" Charlotte looked down at Ruby, who was staring up at her with those exhausted, hopeful eyes. Her baby, who used to skip to school, who used to laugh, who'd been reduced to a terrified shadow by the cruelty of others and the indifference of institutions meant to protect her. "You can really keep her safe? I have existed for 374 years, Aldrich said quietly. In that time, I have learned that the only language predators understand is overwhelming force. Tomorrow, the entire town will know that Ruby Dawson is mine to protect. And I promise you, Mrs. Dawson, no one will dare touch her again." Charlotte saw it then, in those inhuman eyes. Not warmth, not kindness, but something equally powerful, absolute, unyielding certainty. This creature meant every word. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Aldrich inclined his head slightly. 7:30 tomorrow morning. Be ready." He turned to leave, then paused. "Marcus, give Mrs. Dawson your card." One of the security men stepped forward, handed Charlotte a black business card with a single phone number embossed in silver. "If the man in the sedan appears again tonight," Aldrich said without turning around, "call that number. Someone will be there in 3 minutes." Then he walked back toward the mansion, leaving Charlotte standing in the driveway with her daughter and the dawning realization that she just made a deal with something far more dangerous and far more effective than any human authority could ever be. That night, while Ruby finally slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Aldrich sat in his study and made 3 phone calls. The first was to his head of security. I need full background on a Brandon Ellis. Local. Mid-20s. Drives a black sedan. I want his address, his employer, his criminal history if any, and every place he's been seen in the last month. You have 2 hours. The second was to Detective Sarah, one of the few officers in the state police he'd found to be both competent and incorruptible. I'm sending you information on a stalking case the local department has ignored. The victim is a child. I trust you'll find the evidence compelling enough to act. The third call was to his logistics coordinator. Tomorrow morning. Full escort detail. 5 vehicles. I want Marcus, James, and Victor with me personally. And make sure every camera phone in that parking lot gets a clear shot. I want this visible. He set down the phone and looked out at the dark town below, where a predator still circled, unaware that he'd just been marked for destruction. Aldrich Stormvale had made a vow, and he always kept his promises. Ruby woke at 6:30 to sunlight streaming through her window and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of having actually slept.
No nightmares.
No jolting awake at phantom sounds. Just deep, dreamless rest that left her feeling almost like herself again. Charlotte had laid out her favorite outfit, the denim overalls with the daisy patch, a yellow shirt underneath. Ruby dressed carefully, brushed her teeth twice, and spent extra time combing her hair because somehow it felt important to look brave today. At 7:15, Charlotte stood at the window, coffee mug trembling slightly in her hands. Mama, do you think he'll really come? Yes, baby. I think he will. At 7:28, the first SUV turned onto their street. Then the second. Then the third, fourth, and fifth. 5 identical black vehicles, windows tinted so dark they looked like rolling voids, moving in perfect formation. They were massive, the kind of SUVs that screamed wealth and power, and don't even think about it. Chrome gleamed. Engines purred with restrained power. Neighbors stepped onto porches. Curtains twitched in windows up and down the block. Someone across the street pulled out their phone and started recording. The convoy stopped in front of their building with military precision. Doors opened in unison. Men emerged, 6 of them, all in sharp black suits, white shirts, thin black ties. Sunglasses despite the overcast morning. Fedoras tilted just so. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of a presidential security detail, taking positions around the vehicles, scanning the street with professional intensity. And from the center vehicle stepped Aldrich Stormvale. He wore a long black coat over his velvet jacket today, collar turned up against the morning chill he probably couldn't even feel. His platinum hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp angles of his face. Even from the second-floor window, Ruby could see how people on the street instinctively stepped back, creating a bubble of space around him. Charlotte grabbed her purse. Come on, sweetie. They met him at the building entrance. Aldrich's pale eyes found Ruby immediately, and something that might have been approval flickered across his features. Good morning, Ruby. Good morning, Mr. Stormvale. Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. He knelt down, the same way he had yesterday, lowering himself to her eye level with inhuman grace. From his coat pocket, he withdrew a small box of dark wood, opened it to reveal a ribbon of deep burgundy velvet, so dark it was almost black. This, he said quietly, is the color of my house. Do you know what that means? Ruby shook her head. It means that anyone who sees this will know you are under my protection, that you belong to my household. He tied the ribbon carefully around her wrist, his cool fingers gentle and precise. It is a promise and a warning. Do you understand? Ruby touched the soft velvet with her other hand. It felt expensive. Important. Like wearing armor made of shadows. I understand. Good. Aldrich stood and offered his hand. Shall we? Ruby took it without hesitation. His skin was cool and smooth, and his grip was steady as stone. She felt something shift inside her chest, the fear that had lived there for weeks loosening, just slightly, replaced by something fierce and protected. They walked to the center vehicle. One of the security men, Marcus, she thought, opened the door. Ruby climbed in, Aldrich following with fluid grace. Charlotte sat on Ruby's other side, her own hands clasped tight in her lap. The interior smelled like leather and something darker, earthier. Expensive. Are you frightened? Aldrich asked as the convoy began to move. Ruby thought about it honestly. A little, but not of you. Good. You should never fear those who protect you. He looked out the window at the town passing by. Only those who mean you harm. And they, Ruby, should be very, very afraid today. The convoy moved through the streets like a funeral procession, slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore.
Cars pulled over.
Pedestrians stopped and stared. Phones appeared in every direction, recording, photographing, already posting to social media with captions full of speculation and shock. By the time they reached Maplewood Elementary, half the town knew something unprecedented was happening. Ruby looked down at the ribbon on her wrist, then up at Aldrich's profile, sharp and cold and utterly unafraid, and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Safe. The king kept his promises, and today, the whole world would see exactly what that meant. The school parking lot was already crowded with minivans and sedans when the convoy arrived. Parents doing drop-off, teachers sipping coffee by their cars, early bird students clustered near the entrance. Normal Monday morning chaos. Then the first black SUV turned into the lot, and the chaos stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. A teacher dropped her travel mug, coffee splashing across the asphalt. Every head turned to watch as the 5 massive vehicles formed a perfect semicircle near the main entrance, engines cutting off in synchronized silence. Ruby felt her heart hammering, but Aldrich's hand tightened slightly around hers, reassuring, anchoring. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. Marcus opened the door. Morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and playground mulch. Aldrich stepped out first, his long coat billowing slightly in the breeze, and the assembled crowd collectively inhaled. He was stunning in the daylight, or what passed for daylight under the heavy cloud cover. Pale as carved marble, hair like molten platinum, features so perfect they didn't look quite real. When he turned to help Ruby out of the vehicle, every eye followed the movement. The security detail formed up immediately. 3 men in front, 2 behind, 1 on each flank. Marcus stayed closest to Ruby's other side. They moved like a single organism, professionally scanning faces, exits, potential threats. Ruby climbed out, her yellow shirt bright against the sea of black surrounding her. The velvet ribbon on her wrist caught the light. Aldrich offered his hand again. She took it. They walked. The crowd parted like water, parents pulling their children back instinctively. The path to the school entrance cleared as if by magic, leaving nothing between Ruby and the double doors except 20 yards of asphalt and the weight of 100 staring eyes. Ruby could hear whispers starting, spreading like wildfire. Is that him? Stormvale. Why is he here? With the Dawson girl? Isn't she the one? Look at his eyes. Oh my God. A phone appeared, then another, then dozens. Flashes of camera phones capturing every step. Ruby knew by lunchtime this would be everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, the local news sites. Everyone would see. That was the point. She spotted Henry and Andrew near the bike racks. They'd been laughing about something, shoving each other in that careless way bigger kids did. Now they stood frozen, Andrew's hand still raised mid-push, both of them staring with mouths slightly open. Henry saw Ruby looking and met her eyes. She watched his face drain of color as his gaze traveled up to Aldrich, to the security detail, to the vehicles that probably cost more than his parents' house. Who? Andrew started, but his voice cracked. Aldrich didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge their existence. But one of the security men, Victor, Ruby thought, turned his head precisely 15 degrees and stared at the boys with the intensity of a predator marking prey. Henry took an involuntary step backward and nearly tripped over his own feet. They reached the entrance. A teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, the third-grade reading specialist, stood by the door with her coffee cup halfway to her lips, too shocked to move. "Good morning," Aldrich said pleasantly, and Ms. Rodriguez flinched at being addressed directly. Yes, good morning. Ruby," Aldrich said, looking down at her. "I will be here at 2:45 to walk you home. If anything at all, makes you uncomfortable before then, you tell your teacher to call the number on the card. Marcus will be in the parking lot. Do you understand?" Ruby nodded. "Yes, sir." Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his features. He released her hand. "Be brave, little one. You already are." Ruby walked through the doors into the school, and the whispers exploded behind her like a storm breaking. Outside, Aldrich turned to Marcus. "The perimeter?" "Clear so far, sir." No sign of the sedan. "He's here." Aldrich's voice was cold certainty. "He always is. Find him." Marcus touched his earpiece, murmured something. Two of the security team peeled off, moving with casual purpose through the parking lot. They weren't running, weren't drawing attention. Just two men in suits, walking between cars. It took 90 seconds.
"Sir."
Northeast corner. Black sedan, partial view behind the dumpster enclosure. Aldrich was already moving. Brandon Ellis had parked in his usual spot, far enough from the main lot to avoid attention, close enough to watch. He'd been doing this for weeks. Watching the little blonde girl, learning her patterns, working up courage. Today, he almost hadn't come. Something felt wrong. The air felt charged, dangerous. Then he saw her yellow shirt and forgot caution. He didn't notice the two men approaching his car until they were at his windows, one on each side. He startled, hand fumbling for his keys, but they made no move to open the doors.
Just stood there,
waiting. A shadow fell across his windshield. Brandon looked up into the pale, perfect face of something that definitely wasn't human. Aldrich placed one hand on the hood of the sedan, casual, almost gentle. The metal groaned slightly under his fingers. He leaned down until his face was level with the windshield, and when he smiled, his teeth were very white and very sharp. He didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Brandon saw his own death reflected in those winter-pale eyes. Saw exactly what would happen if he ever came near Ruby Dawson again. Not a threat. A promise. A glimpse of something ancient and patient and absolutely merciless. The vampire straightened, removed his hand from the hood, leaving finger-shaped dents in the metal, turned and walked away. Brandon's hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to start his car. He reversed too fast, nearly clipped a parked minivan, and fled the parking lot with tires squealing. He would leave town by Wednesday. Would drive 3 states away before he felt safe enough to stop. And he would never, ever forget the face of the thing that had marked him for death and chosen, just this once, to let him run instead. Aldrich returned to his vehicle, adjusted his coat, and looked back at the school where Ruby Dawson was finally safe. "Let's go," he said quietly. "Our work here is done." The convoy pulled away, leaving behind a parking lot full of witnesses and a town that would never quite be the same. Principal Vickers was in his office reviewing the weekly attendance reports when his secretary knocked, face pale and flustered. "Sir, you need to see this." She held out her phone. The video had been posted 14 minutes ago and already had 3,000 views. 5 black SUVs. A man who looked like he'd stepped out of a Gothic painting. A little blonde girl in overalls holding his hand while suited security formed a protective wall around her. The caption read, "Vampire King escorts bullied student to Maplewood Elementary." About damn time someone protected that kid. The comments were rolling in faster than Vickers could read them. "My daughter's in Ruby's class. She said those boys have been terrorizing her for months." Where was the school administration? "I know that man. Aldrich Stormvale. He doesn't do anything halfway. Those bullies are done." Vickers' phone rang, then rang again. The district superintendent, the school board president, a reporter from the local paper. By 9:15 a.m., Henry Morrison and Andrew Kelsch were sitting in his office with their parents, all of them looking significantly less confident than they had 2 weeks ago. "This is an overreaction," Henry's father blustered. "Boys roughhouse. It's normal." "Mr. Morrison." Vickers cut him off, and there was no practiced sympathy in his voice now. Only the cold mathematics of liability and public outrage. "Your son and Mr. Kelsch's son have been systematically intimidating a 7-year-old child. I have 6 witnesses who came forward this morning alone, apparently emboldened by recent events. The school board has made it clear that this ends immediately. You can't just. Both boys are suspended for 2 weeks, effective immediately. When they return, they will be in separate classes, monitored closely, and one more incident, will result in expulsion and a formal report to the police for harassment of a minor." Andrew's mother had gone very quiet. She'd seen the video too. Seen the dents in Brandon Ellis's hood that were clearly finger-shaped. Understood exactly what kind of protection Ruby Dawson now had. "We understand," she said softly, pulling Andrew toward the door. "It won't happen again." It wouldn't. Vickers knew it. The entire town knew it. "You didn't touch something the Vampire King had claimed." 60 miles away, Detective Sarah sat in her unmarked sedan outside a rundown apartment complex, reviewing the file that had appeared in her email at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. Brandon Michael Ellis, 26, unemployed. 2 prior complaints for suspicious behavior near schools in neighboring counties, complaints that had gone nowhere due to lack of evidence. But this file had evidence. Photographs with timestamps showing Ellis's black sedan parked outside Maplewood Elementary on 17 separate occasions. Outside the Dawson apartment building on 9 occasions. Traffic camera footage placing him within 2 blocks of Ruby Dawson's route home from school on 23 documented days. A pattern impossible to dismiss. Chin didn't ask how Aldrich Stormvale had obtained surveillance footage from private businesses and traffic systems. Didn't want to know. What mattered was that it would hold up in court. She knocked on apartment 2C at 1:15 p.m. Brandon Ellis opened the door, looking like he hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, darting, and when he saw her badge, something broke inside him. "I didn't touch her," he said immediately. "I never touched her. I was just watching." "Mr. Ellis, you're under arrest for stalking a minor and criminal harassment."
He didn't resist.
Barely seemed present as she read him his rights and cuffed him. As she walked him to her car, she noticed his hands were still shaking. "For what it's worth," she said quietly as she opened the back door, "running was the smartest thing you've ever done. If you'd stayed one more day, I don't think I'd be the one finding you." Ellis looked at her with haunted eyes. "He wasn't human." "No," Chin agreed. "He wasn't. But that little girl is. Remember that." The arrest made the evening news. The local paper ran the story on page 1. Persistent stalker apprehended after weeks of surveillance. The article carefully avoided mentioning how the surveillance evidence had been obtained or the dramatic escort that had occurred the same morning. But everyone knew. At the grocery store, at the gas station, in living rooms across town, people talked. Not just about the arrest or the suspended bullies, but about what it meant. Mrs. Chun, watering her roses, mentioned it to her neighbor. That Stormvale man. People said he was dangerous. He is dangerous, her neighbor replied, watching a black SUV drive slowly past, one of Aldrich's security doing routine patrols. Just not to us. At the coffee shop, parents whispered over lattes. My son said Ruby Dawson walked into school today with her head up. First time in weeks. Can you blame her? She's got a vampire king as a bodyguard. Better than the police, apparently. The fear hadn't disappeared. How could it, when Aldrich Stormvale was still very much other, still very much a predator wearing a human face? But it had shifted, transformed into something more complex. Respect. Grudging, wary, but real. The monster on the hill wasn't just a monster anymore. He was a reminder that sometimes the scariest thing in the dark was exactly what you needed to keep the real predators at bay. And in a town that had failed one small, terrified child, that realization felt uncomfortably like justice. 3 weeks after the escort, Ruby's teacher called Charlotte with concern in her voice, but the good kind. Mrs. Dawson, I just wanted to let you know that Ruby volunteered to read her story aloud in class today. In front of everyone. She hasn't done that all year. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. What was the story about? A pause. A princess who makes friends with a dragon. It was surprisingly detailed. That evening, Charlotte found Ruby at the kitchen table surrounded by crayons and markers, tongue poking out in concentration as she worked on yet another drawing. There were dozens now, covering the refrigerator, taped to her bedroom walls, stuffed into folders. All of them featured the same pale figure in black, surrounded by stern-faced men in suits. This one showed Ruby holding a giant's hand. The giant had white hair that went all the way down the page. Around them, stick figures with fedoras stood guard. Ruby had used her silver crayon to make their sunglasses shiny. That's beautiful, baby. Is that for Mr. Stormvale? Ruby nodded enthusiastically. I'm going to give it to Marcus next time I see him. He said Mr. Stormvale keeps the first one I made in his study. Charlotte didn't know if that was true, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the light back in her daughter's eyes. Ruby had started sleeping through the night by the end of the first week. Started eating full meals by the second. Now, in week 3, she was the girl Charlotte remembered, chattering about her day, making elaborate plans for Halloween, teaching herself to cartwheel in the living room. The nightmares hadn't disappeared entirely. But when Ruby woke gasping in the dark, Charlotte only had to whisper, "You're safe. Remember?" The king promised, and Ruby would nod, burrow back into her pillows, and sleep. The school had changed too. At the PTA meeting, Principal Vickers announced the new Safe Passage initiative, a program where staff members and parent volunteers would monitor key routes to school, where reports of bullying would trigger immediate investigation, where kids could request escorts if they felt unsafe. Inspired by recent events, he said carefully, not quite meeting Charlotte's eyes, we recognize that we must do better. It should have happened without a vampire's intervention. But Charlotte had stopped caring about should. She cared about results. Other parents approached her afterward, quietly, almost apologetically. My daughter said Ruby seems happier. If you ever need anything, that must have been terrifying, what you went through. Charlotte accepted their sympathy with grace, but internally she thought, you had no idea it was happening. None of you noticed until it became a spectacle. Still, Ruby was safe now. That was what mattered. On a crisp October morning, exactly 4 weeks after the escort, Ruby announced at breakfast, that she wanted to walk to school by herself. Charlotte's first instinct was to say no. Absolutely not. Never. But Ruby looked at her with those bright, clear eyes, no fear in them, no shadows, and Charlotte remembered what this fight had been for. Not just safety. Freedom. Okay, she heard herself say. But I'm walking you to the corner.
Deal.
They made it halfway there before Charlotte's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She has 3 Overwatch positions along her route. We'll keep visual until she's inside. Charlotte looked up, scanning the street, and spotted it. A black SUV parked near the intersection, windows dark but unmistakably familiar. She texted back, "Thank you." No response. She hadn't expected one. At the corner, Charlotte kissed Ruby's forehead. Straight there.
No detours.
I know, Mama. Ruby rolled her eyes with 7-year-old exasperation, but she was smiling. Charlotte watched her daughter walk away, yellow backpack bouncing, blonde bob catching the morning light, steps confident and sure. Ruby paused at the crosswalk, looked both ways like she'd been taught, then continued on. Halfway down the block, Ruby stopped, turned toward the hill that overlooked the town, where the Stormvale estate sat behind its black gates. A single black SUV was parked on the overlook, barely visible against the tree line. Ruby lifted her hand and waved, big, enthusiastic, the kind of wave you gave to friends. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the SUV's headlights flashed once.
Twice.
Ruby grinned, hitched her backpack higher, and skipped the rest of the way to school. Charlotte stood at the corner, her own hand pressed to her mouth, watching her daughter disappear into the morning crowd of students. Normal. Safe.
Free.
She looked back toward the hill. The SUV was still there, a dark sentinel against the autumn sky. Aldrich Stormvale had made a promise to a terrified child in a red hoodie, and he was keeping it. Not just for a day or a week, but for as long as Ruby needed him. The Vampire King, the town's most feared resident, had become its most unlikely guardian. And somewhere in his manor on the hill, Charlotte imagined, a crayon drawing of a giant with white hair hung in a study where ancient things dwelled. The monster had chosen to protect instead of prey. And that choice, Charlotte thought as she walked home, made all the difference. Ruby Dawson was 7 years old, and she was no longer afraid. The king's vow remained. If this story moved you, if you believe every child deserves a protector and every predator deserves to face justice, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to remember that courage comes in unexpected forms. Subscribe because some stories need to be told. Ruby's voice mattered. So does yours.